Hello, writers. This is Friday, and I have a new thing for you. I'm stealing this idea from my friend Heather. She and I teach together, and she has this great thing that she does called First Page Fridays. And what she told me that she does is that on Fridays, with her group of writers that she works with, she reads them the first page of a new book to introduce people to different books and to kind of get the ideas of different options for reading out there. And so I thought I'd give it a try. I thought it sounded like a lot of fun. I've got a lot of books that I really love, and so introducing some of these to you sounds like a good time. So the book that I have for you today is called The Ocean at the End of the Lane, and it's by Neil Gaiman. So this is a pretty new book. It came out, I think, 2013, and I just read it last year for the first time. And what ended up happening is that I got the book originally on an audiobook from the library because whenever I drive, I always have an audiobook going. Um, I can't listen to music or the radio or stuff. It all kind of drives me crazy, but I love listening to audiobooks. So I've just had a habit lately, lately being the last few years, of always listening to an audiobook when I'm in my car. And the library is such a great source of audiobooks because they've got downloadable books, but they've also got the CDs that I can listen to. So just makes life really easy for me. So anyway, I picked up The Ocean at the End of the Lane, and it was just kind of on a fluke. Like I was just in the CD section looking at audiobooks, and a lot of people have told me that they really like Neil Gaiman. And I've tried out a couple of his books previously, and we just weren't clicking together for whatever reason. It just wasn't there. But then I picked up The Ocean at the End of the Lane and started reading it, or started listening to it in my car. And I came home after work that day and gave my husband the first disc because I had finished the first disc already. And I told him, you have to read this. Like, this book instantly went to my top 10 in terms of books that I love. And my husband was like, whoa, because that's not usually the kind of thing that I say, that I'm really dedicated to a book after just finishing off the first disc. But it was really, honestly, it was that good. So anyway, what ended up happening, I gave him the first disc, I started listening to the second disc, and then we just stayed a disc apart as we were both listening to this book simultaneously, and then we were talking about the book the whole time, which was so much fun. I love doing that. So, Ocean at the End of the Lane, it's a really small read. It's quick. So this is, how many pages am I looking at here? This is 178 pages, right? So you can read this in a week of evening reads, or you can read it on a dedicated Saturday. You can crank out the whole thing, or you can, do the audiobook version and listen to it on your drive. This is a spectacular book. I absolutely, absolutely, positively love this, and there are a few different reasons for it. One, I really like magical realism as a genre, and I like the way that Gaiman captured the ideas behind magical realism, and that the portions of the book that are realistic make me feel as though I'm there. I feel like I can see this space, I can be in this space, I can understand these characters in terms of the realistic life. So I like that because then I feel like I'm being pulled into that story, and I have that sense of acknowledgement of that reality. I can get that. But then the parts of the book that are magical, the parts of the book that are fantasy, those are so inviting because of the way that Gaiman took the main character and invited that character into that magical world. I feel like as a reader, I'm pulled into that space as well. And I really like that. I really like that kind of sense of inclusion of like, here, reader, you're going to come along with me. It's very smooth the way that he's done it. It's not clunky, and it doesn't feel formulaic. And that's something else that I really like, because he has another book that's called Stardust, which I know a couple of my friends are crazy about Stardust. They loved it. For me, it felt really formulaic, so I just I couldn't connect with the book in the way that other people have. But this didn't feel that way. This did not feel formulaic, and I really liked that. So I have a couple of parts that I would like to read to you for First Page Friday. So for Ocean at the End of the Lane, I'd like to read to you. It actually has a couple of different starts. So he's just got, after, following the title page, he has like this tiny little section that's here. And then after that is the prologue, right? So we have the prologue here. And then we jump to chapter 1. So it kind of has these like multi-dimensional starts to this because each of the different starting places start a different part of the story, right? They bring something different to it. So I'm going to begin with just this this little portion here that follows the title page. It was only a duck pond out at the back of the farm. It wasn't very big. Letty Hempstock said it was an ocean, but I knew that was silly. She said they'd come here across the ocean from the old country. Her mother said that Letty didn't remember properly, and it was a long time ago, and anyway, the old country had sunk. Old Mrs. Hempstock, Letty's grandmother, said they were both wrong, and that the place that had sunk wasn't the really old country. She said she could remember the really old country. She said the really old country had blown up. So you get this sense of time that goes way back. And that's part of the magical portion of the story, is that time is bent in a very different way for these characters, and the way that the characters interact with each other and the way that the characters survive, the way that they function within the story is very different in terms of their relationship with time, how they interact with time. And so we get this sense from the very beginning here. And we get this introduction of the duck pond. It was only a duck pond, right? So we start off with that. And as you read this book, you'll realize the importance of the duck pond, because the duck pond kind of comes back in different portions in different parts of the story. So you'll see this duck pond coming back in again and again. So that's just the little tiny portion here that follows the title page. But I'd actually like to read to you the first page of the prologue as well, because this starts the where the character is. So yes, we do have the character as narrator here, the main character. He's the narrator here, though he isn't named, right? We don't have his name here. But in the beginning of the prologue, the first page that I'll read you here we're looking from that omniscient viewpoint, that narrator's viewpoint, at that character, okay? So this is the first page of the prologue here. I wore a black suit and a white shirt, a black tie, and black shoes, all polished and shiny, clothes that normally would make me feel uncomfortable, as if I were in a stolen uniform or pretending to be an adult. Today they gave me comfort of a kind. I was wearing the right clothes for a hard day. I had done my duty in the morning, spoken the words I was meant to speak, and I meant them as I spoke them. And then, when the service was done, I got in my car and I drove, randomly, without a plan, with an hour or so to kill before I met more people I had not seen for years, and shook more hands, and drank too many cups of tea from the best china. I drove along winding Sussex country roads I only half remembered, until I found myself headed toward the town center. So I turned, randomly, down another road, and took a left and a right. It was only then that I realized where I was going, where I had been going all along, and I grimaced at my own foolishness. I had been driving toward a house that had not existed for decades. I thought of turning around, then, as I drove down a wide street that had once been a flint lane beside a barley field, of turning back and leaving the past undisturbed. But I was curious. So that's the first page of the prologue. So this is the character here in modern times, so to speak, because this is a flashback story. So the prologue, you're going to get that character at his present day, and then you're going to flash back in the rest of the story, okay? And I'm not giving away too much, don't worry. So you'll have lots and lots of little delicious tidbits in the story as you go through. There's one more piece that I want to read to you, which is like my very favorite scene in this book. which gives you that sense of how the magical realism is integrated within the realism, how the magic is integrated within the realism, which I think is really lovely. And what it is that we have two of the characters. The main character, he's a little boy, and Letty Hempstock, the neighbor girl who lives next door. She's a neighbor, and they're walking through the Hempstock farm, which is a magical realm, right? It has a lot of things that happen only on the Hempstock farm that don't happen in other places. And we can really get this sense of this place here with this description of what's growing on the farm. Okay, and I just have this tiny little section that I want to read to you because it's so beautiful. Letty said, "That should hold it." She squeezed my hand. I thought she was trying to sound bright, but she didn't. She sounded grim. "Let's take you home." We walked hand in hand through a wood of blue-tinged evergreens, and we crossed a lacquered red and yellow bridge over an ornamental pond. We walked along the edge of a field in which young corn was coming up, like green grass planted in rows. We climbed a wooden stile, hand in hand, and reached another field, planted with what looked like small reeds or furry snakes, black and white and brown and orange and gray and striped, all of them waving gently, curling and uncurling in the sun. "What are they?" I asked. "You can pull one up and see if you like," said Letty. I looked down. The furry tendril by my feet was perfectly black. I bent, grasped it at its base firmly with my left hand, and I pulled. Something came up from the earth and swung around angrily. My hand felt like a dozen tiny needles that had been sunk into it. I brushed the earth from it and apologized, and it stared at me, more surprise and puzzlement than with anger. It jumped from my hand to my shirt. I stroked it. A kitten, black and sleek, with a pointed, inquisitive face, a white spot over one ear, and eyes of a peculiarly vivid blue-green. So yes, they have a field where they're growing kittens of all kinds of different colors. And I love that scene. That was the scene that really stuck with me in terms of the visualization that I did while I was reading this book and kind of making these pictures in my mind. That was the one that really stuck with me throughout the whole piece. And I love the way that Gaiman took that sense of the real world and then just overlaid it with this little layer of magic. And so it's still a field, and it's still walking from one place to another, and it's still two children, and it's still an afternoon. But the piece that you have is just this little tiny layer of magic. And he states it in a way that isn't dramatic and isn't kind of shouting, and it's not blowing trumpets. It's not this kind of a thing of where it feels really dramatic. It doesn't feel like that. It just feels like it's just smoothly interlaced with the rest of the story. And I think that that's something that I really like about the writing and the way that he organized the story. So as a writer, when I think about the ocean at the end of the lane, and I think about what is this value to me as a writer, what can I walk away with from the perspective of a writer and feel like I learned something more, and that I have a new technique that maybe I can use as a writer. I think that that's it. I think that that way that he took the ordinary, the real, right, and the magical, and just interlace them. I think that that method that he used there, which is very smooth and very clean, I think that shows me how you can do that, how you can take two different elements and work them into a story together, and that it doesn't have to be this like brash, kind of loud, shouty kind of thing. That it can be really smooth and clean. I like that a lot from the writer's perspective. From the reader's perspective, what I like so much about this book is that it's just extraordinarily inviting. I mean, I think that it's really hard not to get pulled into the story. I think that this is the kind of story that just about anybody can pick up and just, man, they're right there and they feel like they're seeing it and feel like they're experiencing it and getting that sense of the narrative, that sense of what's happening in the story. I think that this is really easy to do with this particular book. So from the reader's perspective, I just get this sense of connection right away, and that sense of connection continues for me throughout the entirety of the book, which is a really quick read. Like I said, I listened to this for the first time last year, and after I listened to it on audio, I bought the book, the paper version, and sat down and read it because I wanted to see what does this feel like on the page when I read the pages versus when I listen to the story. And the audiobook I strongly recommend to anyone because it's also Neil Gaiman reading it. And I think that there's something really powerful when you hear a writer's voice reading their own story. I think that there's something very different that comes through than when you hear an actor's voice reading the story. Not to say that actors don't do a good job, I think that they do, but I think that there's something really powerful by hearing the writer reading their own story aloud. So this is a book that I would recommend to you. The Ocean at the End of the Lane. This is my first page Friday. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that this gives you a new book to consider reading if you're in the market for a good magical realism novel. Hopefully this will end up on your to be read list, and hopefully you'll read it. All right, reach out if you have any questions. Otherwise, have a fantastic day. Take care.